Hey guys, how's it going? So today I wanted to talk about some Motown style bass lines and just some kind of things they have in common that you can take with you to your own bass lines to kind of make them have that little bit of a Motown feel. Now I'm not covering everything probably that they do, and a lot of the lines are different, so it doesn't mean that every single bass line is going to have these different elements in it. But a lot of them will have some of these elements in them, and you can incorporate these things into bass lines that you're creating over chord progressions just to make them have a little bit of that sound to them. So if you like videos like these, please subscribe, hit the notification bell if you haven't. That's one thing I never say, but it'll notify you every time that stuff like, when I go live or when I have a video coming out. It'll let you know. But let's jump right into it. And hey, Jeff, how's it going? Anybody else that's out there, if you want to say anything in the chat, just feel free to. I'll get to questions at the end of this. But first, what I'm going to do is go over the elements that I think are something that makes songs sound kind of Motown-esque. Okay. So the first thing that's kind of an obvious thing is the major pentatonic scale is used a lot. So if you don't already know the major pentatonic scale, I highly recommend learning it. We'll go over one briefly. We'll do C major pentatonic just shortly. So that's going to be a C, a D, an E, a G, an A, and then back to C. So there are 5 notes in that scale. And if you know your major scale, all of those notes are in a major scale. We're just leaving out a few notes to do the pentatonic. So this would be a C, D, E, G, A, and then you start over at C. Now, if you don't know your letter names, I'll just go through how to play it real quick. That's going to be the 3rd fret on the A string, the 5th fret on the A string, and we've got the 2nd fret on the D string, and then we've got the 5th fret on the D string. The 6th note is going to be the 2nd fret on the G string. And then we've got our octave of C, which is the 5th fret on the G string. Sorry if I made that a little confusing. My brain skipped around and was thinking like in terms of notes within a major scale. So that was the pentatonic scale that I just went over. I'm going to go over the major scale real quick so you know what that's coming from, because I'm going to use numbers from the major scale, basically. I'll explain that in a second. So you're going to do the 3rd fret on the A string, 5th fret on the A string, 2nd fret on the D string, and then this time, so we're doing a full major scale. We're going to do the 3rd fret on the D string, the 5th fret, still the D string. Then we're going to go down to the G string and do the 2nd fret and the 5th fret. Whoops. 2nd fret, 4th fret, because we're doing the full major scale, and then the 5th fret. Can't think today. I keep getting everything confused. So that major scale has all those notes in it. Okay, so throughout this lesson, I'm going to be referring to the notes in the major scale this way. So I'm going to call that first note that we played, even though it's a 3rd fret on the A string, I'm going to call that 1 major scale. So these numbers are called scale degrees, and they're going to come from the major scale, even though we're going to be talking about the pentatonic scale. All of these notes are in the major scale. So if I refer to a 6th, I'm referring to the 6th note of the major scale, not the 6th fret, and not necessarily the 6th note of the pentatonic scale, because the pentatonic scale only has 5 notes before it starts over again. So if you hear me say something about the 6th, I'm talking about the 6th note of the major scale. So that'll be important later. But the main thing right now is just that we need to know our major scale. And a lot of songs will use notes of a major scale and not just the notes of the pentatonic scale. But a really good example of a guitar part actually that uses the pentatonic scale just straight up is My Girl. So it's not the bass line, but but that is a good example. The pentatonic scale gets used a lot. So when I hear the pentatonic scale in bass lines, I hear the sixth note in there a lot. So you might get like, you're going to get 5, 6, 1. So that would be the 5th fret on the D string, the 2nd fret on the G string, and then either the 5th fret on the G string or the 3rd fret on the A string. You're going to get this sound a lot though. So you might hear, it can be played in a different spot, but it's that sound. So of the major scale, you're going to hear notes going back and forth between 1, 5, and 6. And it could either be in order, 5, 6, and then the octave. So 8 or 1, however you want to look at that. 5, 6, 1. It could be 1, 6, 5 going down. Like you've probably heard that a lot. So you can kind of go back and forth between the 1st note of the scale, the 6th note of the scale, and the 5th note of the scale. And it kind of already has that Motown kind of vibe just from doing that. And then you can add rhythms to it. You can do 8th note rhythms like I was doing that were very downbeat oriented, but you can also do some other things with those rhythms. So a lot of Motown lines have a little bit of syncopation in them, which means we're going to hide downbeats. A good example of this is the bass line for both these things together, actually, that 5, 6, 1 idea and the syncopation. So What's Going On, the Marvin Gaye song, the bass line to there uses that 5, 6, 1 thing, and it has a lot of syncopation in there. But so 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and really, honestly, it's not super syncopated, but it uses some 16th note rhythms on the upbeats. So there's an in there, 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a 1 and so right. So we're in the E scale that time. So these are our 5, 6, 1 of that key. Hello, welcome. So hopefully that's not super confusing, but the main idea is that pentatonics get used, and specifically those last few notes of the pentatonic scale. So if this is our whole pentatonic scale, then we might use these last few, which of a major scale would be 5, 6, 1, a whole bunch. But then we might also use the rest of the pentatonic scale as well. So that's not an example from a particular line, but it just kind of gives you that idea. But you can take that idea of that root to 5th to 6th idea, and you can move it around the chord changes. So let's say they were doing a song that has a 1 chord, a 4 chord, and a 5 chord. So I'm just going to give you the example of a C major chord going to an F major chord going to a G major chord. So if you're trying to make that particular progression sound like a Motown line, you could start on either root, but you could do the root, you can go down to the 6th and the 5th. So like you're just going back and forth between the 5th and 6th note of whatever key goes with what chord you're on. Wow, that's confusing. So if you're playing a C, if you're doing the C pentatonic scale, you'd end up with C, D, E, G, A, C. So you'd be playing a G, an A, and a C there. And you could do it down low if you wanted to as well. G, A, C, right? And then if you're on an F chord, you could play the F major pentatonic scale. So you'd have an F in there. And then when we do our 5 and our 6, that would be a C and a D. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So if we're on a C chord, then we're on an F chord. And if we were on a G chord, our notes would be a G, and then our 5 would be a D, and our 6 would be an E. Okay. And so then you might notice I'm messing around with the rhythm a little bit. Dun, 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 dun. So that kind of rhythm is starting on beat 1, but then I'm using some 16th notes at the end. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and 4. So ba-da-ba-dum-bum. A lot of times when we do that 5, 6, 1, we do something interesting rhythmically with it, or something kind of quick rhythmically with it. So, right? Well, sorry, that's not a good example. And so then I was kind of experimenting with the rhythm, but syncopation is a big part of this. And a lot of times notes will kind of hit early. So like if you're expecting things to all be on downbeats or something starting each measure, that's not super typical of every Motown song. Usually there's something interesting that happens somewhere in the bass line, or oftentimes there is, where you'll get to a note soon. You'll anticipate a note by a 16th note on purpose that kind of drives the rhythm. So an example of this, and this is actually just going to be an 8th note, not a 16th note, but an example of anticipating the chord change that's going to happen in the next measure. You could think of Just My Imagination. So the chords there are going to be like a C going to a D minor, right? So a C chord and a D minor chord. And so what's happening there is we're doing that 5, 6 thing that we talked about, or the C chord. 1, 6, 5, 6. So we were using those notes. But then we're going into the 2 chord, and we're getting there a little bit before the downbeat of the next measure. So if we're going bum, 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 bum. See how I hit that last note before hitting beat 1? That's anticipating the next measure. So that's something that happens in a lot of Motown lines. So like maybe in the first measure, beat 1 will be hit and it'll be very obvious, but sometimes the next measure, the strong beat, might be hidden by just getting to it slightly early or holding another note out a little bit longer. But usually it's an anticipation, meaning you're going to get to the next chord slightly earlier than expected. So if the guitar was changing on the downbeats, boom, da, 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 and I don't know if it does or if it anticipates, but even if it didn't anticipate, then you could still do the bass line, boom, 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 then the chord comes in. So it kind of just drives the music forward. So syncopation is a big part of it. Use of 16th notes is a really big thing. So a good example, really, I don't know if you consider this completely Motown, but a lot of people do. So I'm going to consider it Motown. Jackson 5. So if you have the song "I Want You Back," it uses mostly a pentatonic scale connected by some chromatic notes here and there. But when you get to the end of the pattern, it does that little 5, 6, 1, 6, 1, which is just using those 3 notes we talked about: 5 of the scale, 6 of the scale that it's in, and 1. And it's in the A flat scale. So it's in a different place on the neck than the other stuff we were talking about, but it's the same concept in relation to the key that we're in. So here's that line. And right, so we got that, how's it go? Right, so it has that da-da-da-da-da, boom, at the end of it. Got a little buzz out of my bass there. Yeah, so that da-da-da-da-da is what we're talking about. And I wanted to check real quick, is the volume level pretty good for you guys? Is anything too quiet or too loud? If you could, just please let me know in the chat. I'd love to know. I'd love to get some feedback from you guys. But anyway, those are just really, really important elements of kind of getting that Motown sound. So stick with that pentatonic kind of thing. and then you've got that syncopation. Now, it doesn't stick to only pentatonics. Thank you, Jeff, for letting me know. It doesn't only stick to pentatonics. You can do chromatic notes to connect different chords, right? So one that's really common is chromatically walking from 5 to 6. So let's say you're on the 1 chord and you're moving, and that's the C major chord, and you're moving to an A minor chord, right? So there's an A, there's a C. We're trying to get to that A. Well, let's say we used our pentatonics on our C and we were just doing like an arpeggio, basically. And we want to get to the 6th chord. We might go, right? Bum, bum, bum. So we're hitting the 5th of the scale, then the sharp 5 to get to the 6. We're just doing notes right in a row without skipping over any frets. And basically, we'll just usually do that to connect chords, although that Jackson 5 song uses a lot of chromatics. And then it's got the but there that is. From 5 into 6, we got that chromatic note in there because it was going to that chord. But it had one extra one that's not in the scale as well. But is everybody following this stuff? I know this is a little bit tricky. I might be kind of assuming that people have a little bit more theory knowledge than they need to kind of do this. But do you kind of hear these sounds at the very least? And if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat because I know I'm kind of moving quickly. I'll keep going for now, but I'll come back to stuff if we need to kind of go through it a little bit different. So another thing, we've got our pentatonics, we got our chromatic walks to 6, we got our syncopations, and we've got that we use a lot of 16th notes. So that's kind of important, and a lot of really interesting rhythms with those 16th notes, sometimes hiding the downbeats and measures. Sometimes, if you look at the sheet music, there'll be like ties in really weird places and stuff, but a lot of times it's over the bar line going from one measure to another. So like hiding beat 1, like not playing beat 1, but holding a note out through it. Another thing with the syncopation is really like they leave interesting space. Like what I think makes that Jackson 5 bass line, I Want You Back, so interesting is not really the notes per se, or it's not just the notes per se, but it's where they're played and where there aren't notes being played. So 1, 2, 3 E and a 4 E and a. So it's like we leave this really weird amount of space and we come in on an So it's like 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So we do hit beat 1, 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So then we come in on an at I believe it's the before beat 3. No, it's the before beat 4. Sorry about that. So we're leaving all that silence, which is just kind of an interesting amount of silence to leave, and then come in on a really interesting beat, which is the of beat 3. So weird to say. So it's the right before you go into beat 4. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and right? And so that's just kind of an interesting note. It's mostly using pentatonics. There is one little thing there that's a little bit different, but in general, they're just using the pentatonics. So another thing that makes Motown lines sound kind of like Motown, or makes it sound different than other things, is that they're trying to imitate the sound of an upright bass a lot of times. So they like to mute, to get a muted sound, because the upright bass wasn't known for having as much sustain, especially the way they used to record it. So one thing that we can do to kind of mute the sound, first of all, if you're playing a U bass with rubber strings, that kind of automatically does it. But what they would do on the Fender basses is what they would do is they get a piece of sponge or some sort of spongy material, and they would put that up under the strings really close to the bridge so that they would touch lightly back there. So if you don't want to do that, there are other ways to mute. You could also put your palm on top of the strings really close to the bridge, and then it kind of it's not a really good example. I'm not sure how well you can hear the bass when I'm muting there. I might have it too quiet. But with the rubber strings, it almost mutes it too much. But if you had the round wound strings, you would almost need to do that to get a more muted sound that imitates the upright a little bit better. All right. Well, Navix 37 bass. Once again, thanks for hanging out. I hope you can come back. But I understand. I know that time zones are very different. By the way, where's everybody tuning in from around the world? Are most people in the U.S. or are most people coming from other countries? Let me know in the chat if you get a chance. Okay, so we've got the ideas of syncopation. We've got the ideas of using 16th notes. We've got our pentatonic scales, and specifically using the last 3 notes of it, the 5th of the key, the 6th, and the octave. And then we've got that we can do that on different chords when we move them around. Very cool. So we got someone from Ohio. Awesome. And then we've got the use of very interesting space. So that's kind of the main thing there. And then we want to have a muted sound. So that's why I like using the rubber strings for stuff like this. I think it automatically has a muted vibe because the rubber strings just don't, or polyurethane, however you want to look at them, they just don't ring out as long. So they don't have as long of a sustain, and that gets the sound more similar to a mic'd upright bass, which is kind of the sound they were going for back then. And then they also happen to use a Fender Precision bass. I think there were 2 main Motown bass players. And that was James Jamerson and Bob Babbitt. And both of those guys use Fender Precision basses. And the Fender Precision basses get a nice kind of warm tone. They sound good with that muted vibe. But if you're really trying to get that sound, you could go for that tone rather than using a U bass. But I feel like these kind of hold up. When you play these songs, they kind of work pretty well for the vibe at the bass line. And then you're also going to use some chromatics in some interesting spots. So for instance, like going to the 6th chord, we could do that. Right. And so so there are a lot of little walk-ups and things going on, sometimes just chromatically. And instead of just doing quarter note walk-ins most of the time, like instead of going, like bum, 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 really on the downbeats, you might end up with some other rhythms as well. Hi, Mocha. How's it going? So, So dun-dun-dun is a really common rhythm. Good. Thanks for stopping in. 3 and 4. Dun-dun-dun. So and a 1 is kind of a really common thing to do that chromatic walk up to 6. You could also do a chromatic walk down to 4. So you could be doing arpeggio. Right. Dun dun dun. That kind of thing happens a lot. And then usually go into the other notes in the scale besides walking into 6 or walking into 4. You might generally use major scale walk-ins instead of doing chromatic, where it's just any fret in a row. Not worrying about if you're staying in the key or not. So there's a lot of different things there, but basically combining all these elements with arpeggios, walk downs, pentatonic scale, syncopation, and really, specifically of the pentatonic scale, that 1-6-5 kind of sound. You put all those together and you can come up with a whole lot of different lines. I know rhythmically speaking, I'm just talking in general terms about the syncopation. So there are a lot of different syncopations that you can do. Oh, wow. Cool. We got someone from Russia as well. Greetings. Thanks for stopping in. So that's awesome. We got some people from all over the world now. Very cool. So now we can just talk about like examples of bass lines. I think that would be cool. So earlier I mentioned Just My Imagination, that bass line. It uses a lot of these things, right? So first we're starting on our root note on the downbeat like normal. Then we're doing 6, 5, 6, and then going into the 2 chord. And so that 6, 5, 6, you could play it here. But that's just using that pentatonic scale, just using those last few notes of it. And then we syncopate going into the next downbeat. Right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So it's on the and of 4 instead of what we'd normally expect, which is waiting for the downbeat, beat 1 of the next measure. Okay. So that's a good example. I know I mentioned the Jackson 5 earlier. All right. For some reason, I'm getting a lot of buzz today. I'm going to blame my own playing and not the instrument so much, except that first fret. It likes to buzz on its own. Okay. But that has a whole lot of elements going on. So for the most part, we're using the A-flat pentatonic scale. You can see it there, but it's the same set of notes down here. It's just playing it in a slightly different position. So mostly we're using the pentatonic scale. Occasionally we're using a chromatic note to connect one part to another, right? So that note's not in the scale, but it chromatically walks in and we eventually get to the 6. So, so most of that's the pentatonic scale. Then it gets to the 4 chord, which isn't the pentatonic scale, but that's just because we're changing chords there, right? And then we have a note here that's really not in the scale, but that's okay. It's kind of just a cool little thing in there. I always thought it was just straight up the pentatonic scale, but it's. I just played it wrong a minute ago. So it's kind of scooping in from the flatted third into the third. So if we're in the key of A flat, our third is C. And so we're going from the 2nd fret, that B note, into C. Dun, dun. That explains why it sounded weird earlier. I'm playing a note that doesn't even need to be in there. And then we got that. So we've got an interesting use of rhythm. 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a. And same thing, we're leaving out those downbeats. We're not playing beat 1 of the 2nd measure. 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a. And then it would be 1 on the next measure, right? 1E and a 2E and a 3. So 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a. And then we're not even playing beat 3 of the 2nd measure either. We're coming in on another weird 16th note partial, which is that E. So we're counting 1E and a 2E and a. That 2nd measure, we're going 3E and a. So not playing on beat 3, but playing on the E, the and the a. So we're leaving out downbeats everywhere, basically, not all the way throughout the piece. And obviously we're hitting the first one, but that's that syncopation that I'm talking about. The fact that we're having to count 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a means we're using 16th notes. So we're not just using 8th notes. We're not just using quarter notes. So that's a really good example. And then when you get through the pattern, you have this da-da-da-da-da at the end, and that's the 5th, the 6th, and then that A flat up the octave. So that's that 5, 6, 1 idea from the pentatonic scale. All right. So there's that. That bass has a muted tone all the way through it. So it's kind of like the quintessential thing. I'm pretty sure it's a Fender Precision bass. So it's got that tone, that classic tone that you expect to hear. And then it has a chromatic walk into the 6th note of the scale of the key. So if we're playing A flat, our 6th note of the scale would be that F down there, 3rd fret on the D string. And we have this chromatic walk up into that. And so we have an extra note in there, but the important thing is really just that we're using that sharp 5 to get into the 6. Okay. Judging by the lack of comments over here, I'm afraid that I've lost you guys on some things. Does anybody have any specific questions about what on earth I'm talking about doing all this stuff? I know it might be a little confusing. If you are confused by this, I've done a couple of videos on where I'm getting this number system from. There's a video that I made called How to Learn Songs on the Spot. And that one explains that you're kind of using a major scale and you're giving each note in that major scale a number based on where it appears. So the first note of the scale, second note of the scale, third note. So it's 1, 2, 3. So hopefully that helps. Cool. But how can you use this in your line? So I'm giving examples of like playing other people's stuff. And so now we want to take kind of the stuff that we've learned. And like if somebody comes over and they're just jamming with you and they're playing like a C chord, an F chord, and a G chord or something. And let's just say they're staying on each one and they're doing if it's a ukulele player, they're doing the typical ukulele kind of thing. You know, that down, down, up, down, up strum pattern that you've probably heard before. So let's say they're doing the C chord for 2 measures, the F chord for 1, the G chord for 1. If they're doing that rhythm, I'm trying to think how you can make it kind of a Motown vibe. They might, you know, them giving you that strum pattern, down, down, up, down, up, might keep you from being able to do 16th notes as easily. But you can kind of work them in if you want to. I'd have to hear how it sounds together. Actually, I wonder if it clashes or not. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, actually, you could wait a little bit and throw in 16th notes, and I think it would work just fine. So literally, just that 5-6-1 idea on each chord. So you could start with just having a groove like that, and then you could add little walk-ins into each chord. And you can do a chromatic walk into 5 as well. So even just off of using those few ideas, you can kind of create a bass line that's a little bit more interesting than just going, you know, just doing the arpeggio. I know a lot of people always ask me if they can do something other than 1-3-5. You know, they hear all the time that you can make a bass line out of using the arpeggio, 1-3-5 of a key. Right? That's kind of boring, so they want to figure out how they can vary it up. Well, this is one way. You could do an arpeggio and then do that rest of the pentatonic scale, which is the part that sounds very Motown-like. You know, right? So you go boom, dun, dun. You know, so you could use kind of both of those concepts. That may be a little bit too busy for most things, but you kind of get the idea of how you can mix these ideas together. And then now we're going to talk about syncopation, right? So that has the 16th notes in there, but I'm still mostly accenting the downbeats. So I'm wondering how we can do that. So we could just anticipate each measure. So that's kind of a cool thing to do. So like 1 and 2, I'm just going to use eighth notes for the idea. So this is kind of pulling more from that just my imagination vibe, right? So how they get to that chord a little bit early. What if we just take that one idea and throw it into this line where we're going 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. Now it sounds like rock and roll, though. Now it sounds like I don't know. It sounds like a whole bunch of things, but you get the idea. You can kind of add it in here and there, and it'll sound good. So if we do it like they did on Just My Imagination, where it's just on the second measure, maybe that'll sound good. Let's see. So 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and so it's the and before beat 1. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4. There are 2 and 3 and. Sorry, I can't talk and play at the same time. And then you could add, like maybe at the end of that, take that idea from whatchamacallit, from the Jackson 5 song, I Want You Back. Or you could do that kind of thing. 5, 6, 1. So we've got right. So I'm doing mostly an eighth note line, but then at the end adding in that little da-da-dun, da-da-dun kind of thing, just to get you from the end of the piece back to the beginning, almost like a blues turnaround or something, but it's not bluesy. It's just a way to get from the end of the progression back to the beginning of the progression. Awesome. So you decided to sell your double bass and grab a uke bass. You know, my obvious question is going to be, why not have both? You know, but I wonder, is there a reason that you want to get rid of the upright, like space reasons? Maybe is a lot of times why people can't have an upright. I know they take up a lot of space. Or is it something more like, I know that if my wrist gets tired, it's a lot easier to play the bass ukulele rather than the upright for that reason. And then I know some people just don't want to lug an upright around. It's just the weight of it, the bulky size. It's not really that heavy, but it is kind of hard to get through doorways if you have to walk with it, stuff. So I just wonder, I wonder what your reasons are for not just keeping both. But let me know in the comments if you're still there. Was it 7? Curtin, the beard reviews. Thin beard reviews. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I haven't. I just decided to keep all of them, but I guess there are reasons not to. So let me know in the comments because I'm curious about that. Okay. So that's kind of one concept that we can do. Now we said we could also do arpeggios. We can also use more of the pentatonic scale. So let's say somebody goes like, right? You can use more of that pentatonic scale like that. So I'm still doing that thing where I'm anticipating syncopating beat 1 of the second measure. Right? But I'm just using all the notes of the pentatonic instead of just a couple. That's kind of cool. It sounds pretty cool. And descending down it rather than just the obvious going up it. But that's just combining those things. You could think about it as just doing an arpeggio. You could also chromatically walk down to that 4 chord. So I'm going to choose a different progression now that we've kind of gone through that a little bit. But you can use pentatonics. You can use 16th notes. That 5, 6, 1 of the pentatonic specifically is very, very Motown-esque. Like I can think of so many songs that use it. I mean that's I Was Made to Love Her. There's a Stevie Wonder song, and basically that bass line is literally just 1, 5, 5, 6, 1, 1, and you can call it 8, 8 if you want to, but I'm just gonna say it's the same note as the first note of the scale, just an octave up. It's literally just using the root, the 5th, the 6th, and the octave. And then it does some crazy stuff after that, which is using all this other stuff that we're talking about. It has it has some arpeggios outlining some things, but it also anticipates, does a whole lot of other stuff. I just can't remember all the details of that line without looking at the sheet music. But there's a lot of syncopation in that one. There's a lot of 16th notes. And there's a lot of chromatic walk-ins. So I think it does something like that, where it does the root to the sixth to the fifth, and then chromatic down to change into the next chord, which is the 4 chord. So that's kind of a cool thing that we could apply. Right? So what was our rhythm on this thing? So we got dun, 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 dun. Maybe if we do one measure of each. I can't even think of how to fit those two together. I don't think it's gonna work. So dun, 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 dun. So maybe I could go. Or gotta get that chromatic in there. Da, da, da. So that's going from chromatic 5 descending into 4. You could also just take that and throw it on the end of an arpeggio. Right, and then anticipate in different spots. So we've got that. If you wanted to, you could practice doing this on an electric bass and do the palm muting. So you could play with your thumb and then palm mute back here. Or you could put some sort of spongy material underneath just to deaden the strings a little bit. I think it's deadening it too much on here, honestly. Let me switch to the electric bass just so you can get an idea of the difference in sound. Get my trusty Fender out. It's a Squire, but it's got that vibe, you know. So if you're playing on here, that's with muting. I'm gonna give it all the, and without muting, it's like, so see how bright and how it's kind of very abrasive and in your face kind of, well, that's why we kind of mute the strings. So if we mute them just a little bit, they don't stand out in the mix so much, and they're not really loud and overwhelming in the song. All right, so let's see. Leo, the piano man. Very cool. Congratulations on your U-bass. What should you do first? If you say you already play guitar, so I'm just going to take a break on this, on the Motown stuff, because I think we've covered pretty much everything, just getting the idea of muting, syncopation, pentatonic scales, and all that other stuff. So Leo, you play guitar. How much do you play guitar? Do you just know chords? Do you know how to play scales? Because what I would recommend on bass is really know your scales, really get the idea of these grids. If you don't already know this from guitar, assign your fingers one finger per fret, and just really get the idea of the grid. So if you're used to that kind of thing already, be able to play our major scales within those grids. And your minor scales too. So I think it's just kind of important to know the scales. And if you already know those and you're already comfortable on them, I'd say first try playing them and make sure that you're still comfortable on the new instrument like that. You want to develop some right hand technique. With the U-bass, it's a little difficult because there's nowhere to really anchor your thumb. There's no great place to anchor your thumb unless you got one that has a thumb rest that somebody put on there. So what I generally do on the U-bass is I kind of rest my arm lightly on the body, but not pushing down on it hard or anything. And then I kind of just let my hand float if I'm playing the E string. But if I'm playing any of the other strings, I let my hand sit on the other strings, because then it'll mute the other strings as I'm going down too. But you can't like put all your weight on. You can't put all your weight of your hand or weight of your arm on the string either, because if you bend that down, it might get in the way a little bit. Right? So yeah, so you're mostly going to be playing individual notes instead of chords. So just kind of getting used to playing more individual notes is good. I have a whole series of beginner stuff. If you're familiar with the root fifth kind of stuff, I mean, if you play piano, you're probably familiar with your intervals, judging by your name. So you've probably played a lot of bass lines on the left hand of your piano stuff. So if you've done a lot of individual bass lines, I'd probably learn those lines on the bass just to get your mind really comfortable with how to translate stuff you already know onto bass. That's been a really big help for me on other instruments, is being able to play it on one instrument and picturing what that looks like on the new instrument. And just kind of, once you make that connection, then you can kind of get all the other things that you know how to do there to connect easier onto bass, if that makes sense. And if you already play guitar, you're already there too. But things you want to know is different styles of bass lines if you don't already. So like we're talking about Motown right now, right? So knowing that we like using the pentatonic scale a lot for Motown stuff is really important, and just knowing these little things about the genres, right? So at the Motown thing, it's that we want to mute while we're playing. But if you have the U bass with rubber strings, then you don't really have to worry about muting as much. But yeah, you could palm mute if you need to, if you have the round wound strings, or you could even put something up under the strings. Some people use a sponge. I think when people were doing the Motown lines, they didn't palm mute. They had something up under the string doing that for them, so they didn't have to think about it. And then if you want to sound like James Jamerson, who's like the most well-known of those bass players, going back to the Motown stuff, I don't think that's a good first place to start. But I would say like learn country lines, learn blues. Blues would be an excellent genre to go into, because all of those blues bass lines will give you a lot of the shapes you need for other stuff. Okay, but back to the Motown stuff. It's kind of, pentatonic scales. If you know your pentatonic scales, it still relates to that. James Jamerson played with one finger a lot, so he didn't pluck alternate fingers. So he'd play these really fast lines with one finger. So you may want to just work on getting speed up with one finger to get that consistency of sound. Or you might not, I mean, honestly, people in the know can kind of hear that thing, but it's not really the most important thing. On A string. So you're saying you do this like that? Yeah, so you can do your pattern doing 3 notes on one string if you wanted to, Jeff. That's great. And that works for the Motown stuff too. I think it works to see where to do the chromatic notes from the 5 from the 5th note into the 6th note. That works really well. So if you're doing that, and to kind of translate that for people that are watching that don't know what Jeff said, he's playing the first 3 notes of the pentatonic scale. So in this case, the C pentatonic scale will be playing C, D, E as the 3rd fret on the A string, 5th fret on the A string, and 7th fret on the A string, which is a little bit more of a stretch on a full-size electric, but on U bass, it's not much of a stretch at all. So this pattern does work really well in that regard. And then he's playing the 5th of the key on the 5th fret of the D string, then the 7th fret of the D string for the 6th note, and then the octave from the 1st note is going to be the 5th fret on the G string. So 3, 5, 7 on the A string, and then we've got 5, 7 on the D string, and then the 5th fret on the G string. And that kind of works if you were playing the guitar part for My Girl, because you could like slide into the throat and kind of have a cool little, I'm not sure if that really happens in the song, but it's a nice little effect if you wanted to slide from the 2nd note into the 3rd note. That's pretty cool. But yeah, if we're doing a song with a different chord progression, I'm going to come back to this idea of doing chromatic walk-ins into different chords. Then let's say that our chord progression was a 1, 6, 4, 5. So almost like Stand By Me. but maybe with a slightly different rhythm. So let's say that we're staying on each chord for the same amount of time. They probably wouldn't do that walk down. That was such a cheesy scale walk down. I don't hear that a lot in Motown songs, but I do hear the dun 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 dun. That's a really common thing. That's that pentatonic scale going down to the 6th note and the 5th note of the scale, but down the octave. So C, A, G, A, G, A, C. So we're going to go from that, then we're going to go into the 6th note of the scale. Oh, C. Or I don't like that line. Let's just go from the root right to the 5th. And I notice a lot of times on certain songs when you're on the 6th chord, you can do some other things like, like that. But you could also just go back and forth between the root of that chord and the 5th of that chord with the same rhythm. So let's see. Right, go. And then when you get to the 4 chord, we can go back to that idea of the pentatonic shape. Of the 6th of whatever chord you're on and the 5th, and then back up. So when we're on the F chord, which is our 4 chord in this key, it'll be F, D, C, D, F, F. Right, and you can do a chromatic into the 5th note of the scale, too. Wipeout uses a lot of 5-6-1 as well. Yeah, so there's just a whole bunch of tunes, and they're not all Motown tunes. What's another one? I'm trying to think. There's some Southern rock songs. There's some Leonard Skinner stuff that uses a lot of that too. So what defines Motown? So basically, it's like a combination of these elements kind of helps for a bass line. But as far as just in general Motown. Is that a question, or are you just kind of stating Motown? Motown was like a record label, so a lot of songs went through, and it was like based out of Detroit, and so it's a whole bunch of that music. And yeah, I'm so sorry to hear about Eddie Van Halen. Try to stick this other question before going into that, but yeah, it's so sad about Eddie. But as far as the Motown stuff goes, it's basically like there were a group of musicians that they used on most of the records, and they would just get different singers to come in and sing the different songs. And so it was like they had songwriters on staff, and then they had that. So this is kind of pulling from just what those particular bass players. So a lot of it's James Jamerson, a lot of it's this guy Bob Babbitt, and so I'm basically just pulling things from what they did on the records, which is why I'm giving a lot of examples of songs, but it's just kind of like the Motown sound, and I'm just trying to break down a little bit of that vibe, not all of it, but just some key points that I think you could add to your bass lines to make them sound a little bit more like that. So if that was a question, you might have just been saying, that's kind of a cool way to just phrase the video or whatever, what defines Motown, but that's basically what it is. Yeah. So Motown songs, I mean, a lot of them are different from each other, but a lot of these elements are present in a lot of different Motown songs. So, I mean, there's some that use a lot more chromatics than what I'm talking about, and there's some that walk down scales. There's some that walk up scales. But in general, the things that I really like about Motown music, I guess this could just be like a list of my favorite things about the bass lines that might make it sound a little bit more like that. So using pentatonic scales is really big, and kind of using them in a rhythmically interesting way. So So there's just kind of a whole bunch of things going on there, even though I'm just using the pentatonic scale to play that. Right, but see, that doesn't sound super Motown-like because I'm not muting the strings. So most of those guys would have like a sponge underneath there, because like it's really hard to do with just your thumb. So they weren't doing the muting with their thumb like I am right now. It's kind of hard to do that quickly, you know. But you get the idea. So there's kind of some things that are strong about it. They do usually hit beat 1 of the first measure, unless it's like a pattern that the whole band is following. But yeah, just that classic vibe with all those classic lines. There's just some elements there that you might be able to throw into if you're just jamming with somebody, if you're writing a song, if they're just playing a chord progression or something, that you can add some of these little things in there. And you might notice that a lot of these things are used a lot in a lot of other songs, but that aren't considered Motown, that are just pop songs or rock songs or whatever. But they're very inspired by this stuff. And I don't think that they would be using all these elements in the same way if it weren't for the Motown bass players there. And then it's like, if you think about Jaco Pastorius, if you know that bass player, he combines some elements of what's going on in these Motown lines with bebop. And so bebop is a totally different idea, but he was kind of influenced by both of these things a lot. And he blended them together in his jazz fusion and all these other things that he did. And you can kind of hear this kind of R&B kind of element that's going on that's very Motown. The Motown musicians influenced a lot. Yeah. But yeah, so I'm just I know I've said the summary like 10 times, but things I like about it: pentatonics, specifically using the fifth, the sixth, and the root, whether it's the octave up or the root of whatever chord you're on. That sounds really cool just in general. And if you're getting sick of using 1-3-5, then using 1-6-5 or 1-5-6 in different orders might just vary it up. And a lot of times, instead of going up to the fifth and the sixth, sometimes you might go down to the sixth and the fifth versus, right? You can do it in either place, but you just have those, you have all those different options. So pentatonics with the fifth and the sixth, chromatic walk-ups going into certain chords work pretty nicely. Can Motown be played on a U bass? For sure it can. I started on the U bass. I'm guessing you joined, John, I'm guessing you joined the live stream just a little bit later. Yes, I switched over to, I kind of feel like the U bass already has the vibe, because you have the, if you have the polyurethane strings or the rubber strings, you don't need to mute the strings in any sort of way, because they already have a muted kind of sound to them, which is one of the reasons why they sound more like an upright bass than an electric bass. So that's a great question. But yes, you can play it on U bass. You can play those kinds of songs on there. In fact, I'll switch back. Oh. To me, it almost has the right vibe, you know. It's usually the original Motown songs were on a Fender Precision bass mostly, but they mute the strings, which kind of gives it more of that vibe anyway. So it kind of helps to have the polyurethane strings, I think, for getting that sound. All right, that's a good question. What do I prefer more, U bass or bass guitar? I mean, I like both, right? But I play the electric bass probably more because I've played it longer. So I started playing electric bass when I was in 5th grade, and that was a long time ago, right? So I've been playing electric bass for 20 years. I've been playing U bass for a little over, the last 3 or a little bit more. So the obvious advantages of why I'd like to play this one in certain contexts more is like, if I'm trying to emulate the upright bass, but I need a portable option, then I could do that. And then I like that I can play things that I'd normally have to stretch really far on, the notes are much closer together. So it's like it's a lot less of a strain on the wrist. But when I play shows, most people want me to play the electric, and that just has that classic sound for a lot of this stuff, whereas the U-bass has a very distinctive sound that's very good for certain things. So I figure it's kind of like a niche instrument. So if I'm playing with ukulele more and stuff like that, then I prefer the U-bass. But in the general band contexts of things, like if I'm playing a show with a full band, I really prefer using the electric because it just has more options with sound. Because I can mute to get more like this sound, but on here I can't get the wide open sound of the strings, and also the slap tone. You just can't really beat the slap tone on a full scale electric bass with the shorter scale bass. So if I had to pick, much to everybody's dismay, I know I would probably pick the electric, but the U-bass is a lot of fun. So I really like using all three of these things you see in the background. But good question. Good question. So yes, you can do all this. Of course. I don't know. I'm trying to come up with some sort of line. Overly syncopating it, I think. Trying too hard to syncopate it, rather. But yeah, you can use. So right here, I'm going to use some arpeggios. Then I might use a chromatic walk up. And then if I'm on a minor chord, I'm not going to do the 6/5 thing. 6/5 in minor is like, it doesn't really sound very very Motown-esque. So I might do like the root of that chord and the fifth. So I'm doing a root, fifth root, root. So I'm never really doing like a country style line. It's not like half notes. So it's much different than country, and it's a little bit different than blues in the sense that most of the time I'm doing some distinct rhythm within the groove. And a lot of times it involves some upbeats, or it might involve some 16th notes. So sometimes you might have a section of a song where all of it's on upbeats. Like you hit the root, root up, 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 root up, up, up. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, that kind of thing, where you have little sections of the song where the band will hit those things together. But those are all really specific to certain sections of songs. So what I'm trying to give you right now is just some general things that you can do to spice up bass lines. And one thing is that just 5-6-1 or 6-5-6-1 or 1-6-5-6-5-6-1, that kind of thing. And then changing to the next chord just a half a beat early to kind of give the song a little push into that chord. Sometimes it's pretty nice, but it works best if the drummer is either doing that with you, or there's just some reason in the song to do that. I mean, sometimes it's a groove killer to not hit right with the drums, but every now and then it's kind of nice to hit on the and before the chord. But you might want to discuss that with the drummer too, if it's not a Motown song specifically. All right. So which thing out of the things we covered today was your favorite that you think you could use in some bass lines? I'm going to name the list so you have stuff to pick from. But using the pentatonic scale, doing that 5-6-1 thing, which is part of the pentatonic scale, but I almost consider it a separate thing specifically. Chromatic walk-ins to the 6 and sometimes down to the 5 chord. Can you slap? Meaning specifically on the U-bass or just in general? And then Jeff says he uses all of it. Leo likes the pentatonic scale. I think the pentatonic scale is a really good thing, and being able to add that 6 into it makes it different than just doing, kind of bass lines that just use the root, the third, and the fifth. So you hardly ever hear slap in Motown. I'm just going to say that right away, is that's not a very Motown sound. That's kind of like a funk thing from other things. So Yes, I can, but it's unrelated to Motown. Just to make that very clear. Okay. Whoa. I still need to fix that fret. And you don't want to hit as hard when you're slapping on the E-bass. Like I'd probably hit a little bit harder on the electric bass. And it doesn't sound as much like slap would on an electric either. But I'll turn the high end up so we can hear. Right? So the answer is yes, you can slap. Follow-up question is that the sound that you're going for? It might be a different effect than you're really wanting when you consider what slap normally sounds like on an electric. But the answer is definitely yes, and it's even easier on the round wound strings. And I have a video of me doing it on the flat wound strings as well. I think it sounds the best on the round wound strings. But that's something. So Jeff, on slap, one of the things that makes it really hard for a lot of people is that they think of it as your thumb is striking the string. And what I like to think about it instead is like you're doing like a door, like you're turning a doorknob, like that kind of motion with your wrist. But then I like to stop my hand from moving right before it would hit the string and just let the momentum carry my thumb into the string. Because if you don't do that, your thumb will stay in the string, right? You'll hit the string and it'll mute the string and it won't pull away in time to not deaden the sound, right? So the secret is pretend like you're trying to stop right here instead of on the string. You're trying to stop an inch away from the string, and then the momentum will carry your thumb into it. And that creates that bounce that you need. And it's kind of like when you're playing with a drumstick, you know, if you slam the stick into the drum head, you mute the sound of the drum. And if you want to get a really good tone, you hold the drumstick by the fulcrum so that when you're hitting it, it immediately bounces up on its own. And you know, you don't have to think as much about the other part because the drum head will bounce you back. But if you're using your hand and you're using the weight of your arm, you might accidentally be lingering just barely too long if you're trying to hit it and then pull away. So yeah, just think about it like that momentum thing, and that might help you get the bounce that you need. But it's also it's harder on U-bass if you're doing U-bass. And the other hard part is the accuracy. Do I do live often? So I play in a wedding band, and I generally play the electric bass when I play those. So out of all the gigs, since I'm in Georgia, we have opened back up most everything, and there are gigs everywhere. And a lot of times it feels scary to play the gigs because a lot of people just aren't wearing masks at a lot of those places. So the ones I prefer are outdoor ones, obviously, because then you don't have to get too close to people. And basically the weddings are people aren't really canceling their weddings anymore. For a few months they were, and then they were rescheduling them for the end of the year. So now I've just got a bunch of weddings lined up. So probably about 3 a month, 3 to 4 of them a month. And then I have a couple of other gigs here and there, but honestly, they feel kind of risky, but I still do them anyway. You know, right now it kind of helps. But yeah, the answer is yes, I do play some live gigs, but not very often with the U-bass. I'd like to do more, but I feel like it's really good for coffee shops because, like, if I was playing with an ukulele player or something, then that would be a lot of fun. And I really want to put something together where I can do a loop pedal solo show kind of thing, and I think that would be kind of fun. Where I do some ukulele and set it down, and then grab the U-bass and lay down a bass line. But yeah, so that's kind of the idea with that. All right. So anybody else? What are your favorite ideas from this Motown sound thing? So there's the muting as well. There's syncopation, which is just hiding the strong beats. chromatic walk-ins to things like if you're going to the 6th chord. And it's like when you do the chromatic walks, you kind of do them quickly. And I think that's like a difference between like blues, where you would walk in slowly. Yep. All right. And then we've got 16th notes. So you have those little using more of that 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a pulse in your head, rather than hearing like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. But there are some Motown songs that just stick to the 8th note pulse and don't really throw any 16th notes in. Just depends on the song and what vibe they're going for. And a lot of times, if you were playing it on a full scale bass, I'd use a Fender Precision bass. And then we can do these arpeggio walk down things. So what I'm doing here is playing the root note, the 3rd, the 5th, and then walking chromatically down. That note's not in the scale, but it leads to that note when going to the 4 chord. That's right. That kind of thing happens a lot. So you do an arpeggio, and then you go back to the 5th, and then walk down to the 4th. Yeah. So hopefully that kind of helps a little bit. And to Momo, as far as reminding you of George Lucas, I've actually heard that a few times before. I've gotten Paul McCartney, George Lucas, pretty much every Beatle, although not usually my hair is this length. That's kind of a weird length, I guess. And several other people. So I take it as a compliment, unless you mean George Lucas currently, in which case that means I'm looking older than I should. So hopefully that's not the case. But if it's a young George Lucas, then I take that as a compliment. So thank you. All right, and I know somebody else said mentioned Van Halen. Now Van Halen, it's I just wanted to kind of like mention that I really like his guitar playing. Obviously, you can't get away from being influenced by someone just that does that much with an instrument, that much new stuff, and just adds a lot. So yeah, my condolences to his family. I know that he has a son that plays bass. I know it's really hard to lose someone that close to you and your family. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. And for those of you that didn't know, I'm sure you've probably heard, but yeah, we lost Eddie Van Halen recently. But if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be able to do any of the tapping stuff, probably, because nobody would have popularized it like he did. So even though the kind of tapping I do isn't always the Eddie Van Halen style kind of stuff, it still played a really big role in my learning. I remember, so I'm basically that's the idea for Eruption. I don't really know the rest of the tapping pattern, but just off the top of my head, and I never arranged it for Ubase at least either. But yeah, that tapping style just like influenced pretty much everyone. I think if you picked up a guitar and you played it past a certain point and wanted to learn lead guitar, you probably learned part of Eruption at some point. And not everybody's influence reaches as far as that. So I just think it's sad that we lost him, but it was really cool what all he did in his life. And he inspired a lot of people to play guitar. And he inspired a lot of people to do more cool stuff like that. Just unorthodox playing in a cool way that just, I don't know, he just reinvented it in a lot of ways. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that after Novix, I think, brought that up. So yeah, he's a big influence on everybody, and it's fun trying to adapt his songs for Ubase and stuff too. Oh, thank you so much. So he says, Khalid, is it Khalid or Khalid? Khalid? That's a cool ukulele bass. It is. I like this one a lot. I have lots of other ones. Maybe this is the time in the show where I can bring the other ones out. Oh, there's a fretless one hiding back here. So the fretless one's kind of fun. I don't usually hear fretless on Motown either, so I guess I should say like that since of the title of the video. You're probably going to hear fretted bass mostly on Motown. Very rarely, if at all, would you hear fretless. Maybe the upright bass. Something is rattling still. Seems like only when I hit a D. So yeah, so there's this one. Sometimes some of the components inside rattle a little bit. But that's fixable if you can figure out what's rattling. And this one has flat wound strings on it, so it's kind of cool. This is the Journeyman. And it came with round wound strings, which are more like just normal electric bass strings, but I got these flat wound strings that are smooth like the upright bass strings. Oh, and Leo, thank you for hanging out. Hope you have a good night. But does anybody else have any questions about anything U-bass related or bass related or anything else? Oh, that's funny. You say you think that Google is stalking your internet history. Base what? I'm not sure what the question is. But yeah, I think all these companies like Google and Facebook and all sorts of things, I get the feeling like they listen into you if you don't set the default on your profile settings on Facebook, for instance, to not listen to you. Sometimes you'll find ads for stuff that you've never typed into your phone or never typed into your computer. And that's kind of creepy when they do that, when they start sending you ads for things that you've only talked about with people in conversation. It's just a little weird. But yeah, I think they do those kinds of things. All right. So but yeah, whether you're watching this now or later, try implementing some of these things and tell me which one you like the best or which ones kind of work best for you as far as the Motown sounds, the pentatonic scales, the chromatic walk-ins, the syncopation, the muting, like you might want to have a muted sound to get more of that tone. And then you could also do the James Jamerson thing and playing with one finger. Right? So just plucking with one finger. And he also had a pickup cover on his bass that went over the strings. And so there's one video of him playing. I can't really find very many. And basically he was playing with Marvin Gaye, and he was sliding these two fingers as how he was anchoring himself, which is something I've never seen before or anybody else do. But he was sliding those two fingers over the pickup cover up and down kind of to anchor himself. And then he was plucking with his one finger, his pointer finger while doing that, which I thought that was fascinating to kind of see that, his technique was just its own kind of thing too. So just a little fun fact if you're trying to imitate a sound. So yeah, just if you're watching this later or watching this now, try these things out and let me know in the comments which one you liked the best or got the most out of. And does anybody else have any questions at all? I think I'm going to go ahead and call it if I don't hear any other questions. So if you have any last minute questions, let me know. Bass with a question mark. I don't know what the question is there. I have a Squier made by Fender jazz bass over there, and it's a classic vibe 70s model. So it's like if that kind of helps, if you're asking which kind of bass that was, then that's that bass. And the upright bass is a Shin. It's a laminate model Shin, so it's the SB80, I think. SB80 sounds right. Sure, it says something on the sticker in there. Oh, I can't read that. It's too dark. But it's made by a company called Shin, Shen, which I believe is Samuel Shin is the guy's name that makes them. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed learning some facets of the Motown bass lines. And if you have any to add, please, by all means, add them in the comments for other people to read. This is not an entire list of every single thing that makes something seem Motown-esque. So please just keep that in mind, that there are always little nuances, and you'll learn more from just learning a whole bunch of songs. A bunch of Motown songs rather than just kind of getting these general ideas of pentatonics, chromatics, and all that stuff. So thank you all for hanging out, and I will see you next week for the Tuesday video and then another live stream next Thursday. All right. Bye, guys.